Hello, thank you very much for joining me on this Billionaire Talks webinar. My name's Chris Bishop. I'm the founding editor of Billionaire Tomorrow, the Pan-African publication that deals with wealth creation, entrepreneurs, millionaires, and billionaires. And today we have a very distinguished young man from Harare, Zimbabwe, a place where I used to work some time, a man by the name of Samuelle Dimairho. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon on this webinar.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar.
And thank you very much indeed to all the participants who are coming on online. And this is a part of Billionaire Talks, which I always love. We have entrepreneurs from all over the world in very surprising places. Samuelle, you may learn to understand is that people come on with their questions and also they listen in to what you have to say, but you have a truly remarkable story. And for a man who, well, can we say, pretty much made it in business before the age of 30, a lot of people might look at you and ask, you know, how did it happen? How did you do it? That's what we're going to be unpacking in this next hour of Billionaire Talk. So thank you very much for joining me. So just tell me, start off with your roots. Just tell me a little about your family, your background, where you were born and where you grew up.
Okay, so I was born in 1990 I'm the last born of 5 children in my family. And I grew up in a suburb called Glenlawn at that time, but probably not in the fancy mansions, but we stayed in a 3-roomed wooden shack for the first 10 years of my life. We used to grow our own food that we ate, maize, vegetables. So, you know, if all else failed, I could still survive and live on maize and vegetables. But besides that, you know, I went to primary school, Lewiston Primary, high school. I was at Prince Edward School. You know, when I was growing up, I was living in a poor family by societal standards. And I knew what it was like to not have money. And I had a motivation to make money. So I started being industrious. And, you know, at a very young age, even in primary school, I used to buy and sell games, sell them to my friends and make a profit and just look at ways I could make money. And then going forward into high school, my father exposed me to a business book that I read, Rich Dad Poor Dad. It opened up my mind that, look, I must not just chase making money, but it's more important to chase a purpose. Because, you know, whenever you chase a purpose and solve a problem, money is a natural consequence. So if you are chasing money, you'll never make it. But try chasing a cause and solving a problem and see how much money you'll make.
Now you went, sorry, go on, just to butt in there for a second. You went to PE, Prince Edward School, which is still quite a, shall we say, I won't say elite school, but it's quite a well-respected school. Was there nothing in your formal education that made you think, well, I want to be a professor or an engineer, all the usual things?
Not even, you know, I just had this you know, before I even read business books, I wanted to make money. And that's what interested me. Even in school, I was good with math and numbers and I loved accounts. And those are the things I loved. So the interesting thing with me and my siblings, despite, I think our parents raised us and they did the best they could under the circumstances. They taught us principles to say, look, life is not about where you start, it's about you finish. Where you finish, you know, you eat what you kill, you know, no work, no food, simple things like that. We learn from a very young age. So they took us to the best schools and sacrificed, but, you know, we're always those kids that periodically will get sent home because fees are not paid, and then they'll struggle and make ends meet and get us back into school. So it was one of those things that they tried to make sure we had a good education. But at no point did I ever think about being a professor, being an academic, working for somebody. It never crossed my mind.
So those early days, one thing that did make me smile when we were interviewing you said your mother had a strict policy. You don't work, you don't eat. How hard could it be to live under that principle sometimes?
To live under that principle sometimes. So, I mean, it was as real as it as it got, you didn't work, you didn't eat. And I think what she was pretty much trying to teach us was that if you're in the world, the truth of the matter is that if you don't work, you won't get paid. And if you don't get paid, you won't have money to buy something to eat. So she was just trying to make us realize and expose us to what the real world is like, but in a safe environment.
Was there one thing that your mother said to you, you think, that helped make you? I'm sure she said lots of things, but is there one thing that stands out that she said to you that made you into a successful entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think that simple statement, you don't work, you don't eat. As simple as that.
That was it.
Yeah, that was it. So it taught me to have a work ethic and to know that for everything, if I expect to eat tomorrow, I have to work today.
Now, just to say a little bit about the context of where you were living, by the time you were about 9 or 10, by about the year 2000, the economy in Zimbabwe had sort of started to get very difficult. What are those early memories?
Okay, so, the early memories, I was still in primary school at that time. But one thing that I remember is that inflation was starting to pick up. And every term, I needed most money each day to be able to buy a pie at the tuck shop for my transport money home using public transport. And progressively over the years, from using coins, we started using notes, small notes, and then the small notes became bigger and bigger and bigger. And that was the inflation picking up basically around the early 2000s in Zimbabwe.
What were your stories? I mean, I heard all kinds of stories during that time covering the story of Zimbabwe. People would say sometimes they'd phone up to buy something and people would say, okay, if you can make it here in an hour, that's the price. If any later, you're going to have to pay more. I mean, do you have a story like that?
Yeah, what I vividly remember is that, hyperinflation, we got into hyperinflation probably from 2005, 2006, and the worst phase was 2007 and 2008. By then, it was so bad that, prices were doubling every 15 hours. So that was very much possible that if you didn't do anything immediately with your money, tomorrow it might have been worthless. And sometimes I remember they always kept on increasing the withdrawal limits, right, for taking money out from the bank. The day they'll introduce the withdrawal limit, maybe the money will be enough to it will be enough to start to take public transport from home to your workplace, buy a loaf of bread and go home. Within a couple of days, that money would not even be enough to go one way on public transport. So it was a very fast environment where if you got Zim dollars, you just had to pass them on to the next person as quickly as possible, because if you didn't, they'll be worthless very quickly.
Now, in the middle of all this, when you were about 15, 2005, you started to have other ideas about the possibility of trading in shares. Now, just before we talk about how you got into that, what gave you that idea?
Okay, so what gave me that idea? I think obviously reading the business books, I learned a lot about, I wanted to be a businessman and an investor. So I learned that I must, do something in the investment space, because that's what I could do whilst I was at school. Starting a business was not practical because I was still in school full time. So I used to read newspapers during my school breaks. During school holidays, I'll go work for free at companies to gain experience. And then I figured, look, I could play on the stock market. It worked well in the sense that, the stock market traded whilst I was at school. By the time I'll be finished with school, the market will be closed. The price sheets will be out. You could go to those brokers after school, place your trades for the next day. They trade them at the market. You go after school to check if your trades have been executed and check the price sheet and see if there are other opportunities to buy stock low and sell it high.
So that first day you walked in, you must remember when you were 15 years of age, you were still in your school uniform. The brokers, they must have wondered, who is this guy? What's going on here? Tell us what it was like.
Yeah, interestingly enough, the brokers were very They were very supportive. At no point did they ever make me feel like I was in the wrong place. And, they gave me the room to, they explained how the market. So before I even started investing, I went to, and I'll ask questions, they'll sit down to me, explain how everything worked. Look, I think ultimately for a broker, they make commission on fees. So if people can come and trade, then, it's good for them. And, I'm very grateful they were prepared to accommodate me. I think they also found it intriguing that a schoolboy would come and be interested in participating on the market. And I think it intrigued them as well.
What sort of things did they tell you that made you, to this day, that you still use in your business?
I think it was more of analyzing. I learned how to analyze companies' financial data and be able to tell whether there's value in that company, whether it's undervalued, overvalued. And that's what I'll use in determining whether to buy a stock in something or not, by basically looking at the financials when they came out or historically, and looking at the prospects of the company and seeing where they stood in the market and how they were growing and what initiatives they were pursuing. So I basically got a desktop view of understanding how to value a business and how to value the future, how to estimate the future prospects of a business.
Well, here's one of our first question from the audience, which relates to what you're saying. Now, somebody asks here, now trading is such a volatile industry. How do you know who is reliable when you're trading? Do you recommend doing it through brokers or managing it on your own so you can pass on paying commission?
Okay, so look, I'll always recommend dealing with regulated brokers, because when you deal with a regulated broker, you've got a line of defense. They are bound by the regulators to follow certain standards and procedures in how they operate. And the main point of regulators is to protect investors. So I'll always advise going through a broker. And in fact, there are very few markets I've seen where you can go directly and trade on the market. There will obviously be, even if it's an automated system and it looks like you're trading directly, there's a broker behind somewhere. And you need to know who that broker is, because you need to understand if they're licensed, if they're financially sound, so that if there's a problem, you can have some sort of recourse and protect your investment.
Now, here's another question from one of your countrymen by the name of Tatenda Sibanda. Now, he says, do you recommend using competitive advantage when looking at companies?
Competitive advantage. Yeah, okay, that's a very broad question. But I think, I think for any business to succeed, it has to have a competitive advantage. If it does not have a competitive advantage, it's not going to last. So if you find a business that has competitive advantages, you must invest in it. And if you identify a business with no competitive advantages, it's just a matter of time before someone eats away their market share when they offer a competitive advantage. That I think it's essentially the blue ocean strategy, where a business identifies the core quadrants and the core points of competing in a particular industry, and then they extend and offer new things and services. Then they may not be entirely new, but principles borrowed from another industry to enhance the service or product being offered currently. So if you can identify businesses that find that unique niche and that unique way of enhancing the value to the customer ultimately, then that's a good business, I think.